Welcome to this explainer. Look, today we're going to fundamentally shift how you view global conflicts. We're stepping completely away from those nightly news headlines, and we're digging deep into the World Bank's landmark policy research report, alongside some really cutting-edge stuff from the Households in Conflict Network. Together, we're going to explore the hidden, underlying economic drivers behind civil wars. We're breaking down the mechanics of what the experts call the conflict trap.
So, I want to start by asking you a question. Why does the world so often just ignore civil war? When we look at this global inertia regarding internal conflicts, it's usually rooted in a couple of highly toxic myths. The international community, well, they often believe that these wars are just the inevitable result of ancient, ancestral, ethnic, or religious hatreds. Or even worse, that we should just safely step back and, let them fight it out among themselves. Today, we're using hard data to dismantle those beliefs entirely.
But before we get into all the macroeconomics of it all, we really have to ground our analysis in visceral reality. The defining feature of modern civil war, it's not battlefield combat between soldiers. The devastating human cost is overwhelmingly suffered by non-combatants. We're talking specifically about civilians and, tragically, children. This isn't just a dry economic issue. It's a profound human tragedy, and it absolutely demands our attention.
Okay, so the myth tells us that these wars are fueled by ancient, ancestral ethnic hatreds. But the data reveals a completely surprising reality. Actually, highly diverse societies are usually safer than homogeneous ones. The lethal cocktail that truly fuels civil war is actually economic. It's low per capita income, active economic decline, and a really dangerous dependence on primary commodity exports. Section 1. Development in reverse. Let's look at this catastrophic failure.
The World Bank frames it incredibly bluntly. They say, civil war usually has devastating consequences. It is development in reverse. And it makes sense, right? Once a nation stumbles into conflict, years, literally sometimes decades, of painstaking economic and social progress are just instantly unwound. It's a massive, massive step backward for human prosperity.
And the damage isn't brief. 7. Just let that number sink in. That is the agonizing average length of a typical civil war. That's 7 continuous years of destruction, of capital flight, and of completely halted education.
And the consequence of those 7 years, it's a staggering 15% drop in a country's income compared to what it would have been if peace had held. To put that into perspective, this massive economic contraction pushes roughly 30% more people into absolute poverty. The financial devastation here is absolute.
Section 2. The conflict trap. This is where we get into the vicious cycle.
So it operates as this vicious, self-sustaining loop. When a country faces low and declining incomes, it creates a massive pool of impoverished, disaffected young men. And these men, they can be very cheaply recruited by what researchers call entrepreneurs of violence. Because the state is weak and poor, it simply can't stop the rebellion. So the resulting war further wrecks the economy, which in turn breeds even more poverty, making the very next war even more likely. Low-income nations are essentially forced to play a continuous, terrifying game of Russian roulette with conflict risk.
Section 3. The 3 rings of suffering. Let's talk about spillover effects.
The damage of a civil war utterly refuses to stay neatly contained within borders. Instead, it ripples outward, like a stone thrown in a pond, in 3 distinct rings of suffering: internal, regional, and global. And this completely shatters that myth that we can safely just stand by and let them fight it out.
In that first ring, the internal ring, we see massive displacement, 5 million. That's the number of internally displaced persons the UN High Commission for Refugees assists purely as a result of civil war. We're talking about real people forced to flee their homes, losing their entire livelihoods, and risking deadly local diseases. Then the damage crosses borders into the regional ring. Now consider this shocking metric. For every 1,000 international refugees that escape into a neighboring country, that host nation sees around 1,400 additional cases of malaria. You add in significantly reduced economic growth and sudden regional arms races, and the neighbors suffer tremendously. Finally, we reach the global ring. And this impacts all of us. Territories without recognized governments become the epicenters for staggering 95% of the world's hard drug production. Major supply routes run directly through these conflict territories. And these lawless zones, well, they also provide safe havens for international terrorism. Think of al-Qaeda utilizing Taliban-held territory in Afghanistan, or the trade of conflict diamonds in Sierra Leone.
The cost of civil war is truly, for sure, a global burden.
Section 4. The microeconomics of violent conflict, a completely new approach.
But hey, there is hope here. A whole new subfield of empirical development economics called the microeconomics of violent conflict has recently emerged. Researchers are finally abandoning these broad, sweeping assumptions, and instead they're using rigorous, micro-level data straight from individual households to build real, evidence-based peacebuilding interventions. It's a real game changer.
Section 5. Paths to Peace. Breaking the Trap.
The data proves that breaking the trap requires a highly integrated approach. No single intervention works alone here. We need coordinated military peacekeeping for the first few post-conflict years to provide stability, paired simultaneously with massive, targeted aid to rebuild the economy and, of course, robust international resource governance.
Because natural resource wealth directly finances rebel organizations, the international community has to fight back economically. Initiatives like the Kimberley process for tracking rough diamonds or the Publish What You Pay initiative, they're explicitly designed to cut off funding. We quite literally have to starve these rebellions of their economic oxygen.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Civil war is fundamentally an economic failure with massive global spillovers. If economic development is our absolute greatest weapon against war, will the global community finally choose to invest in it proactively, before the next conflict trap springs? Breaking the trap isn't just charity, guys. It is the ultimate form of global conflict prevention. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this changes how you look at the economics of peace and war.